In 2011, the Dutch production studio Guerrilla Games asked their employees to freely pitch ideas for a new intellectual property after the success of their first franchise, Killzone. They chose what eventual game director Matthias de Jong would call their riskiest pitch, and repurposed the development of their game engine Decima to begin production on what would become Horizon Zero Dawn, the first installment of their new series. Their publishers, Sony, initially met the idea with some hesitance, not because it contained huge robot dinosaurs, but because a woman was going to be the main character. But worried that both those at the top of Sony as well as epic mega super gamers would shit and piss their baby diapers, Sony inevitably caved and A-okayed the unbelievably risky choice of a conventionally attractive white woman protagonist. The basic elements of the story were it was going to be an open world, one which was beautiful, large, and dangerous. Set in a sci-fi dystopian future, humans are divided into tribes, living on the ruins of their ancestors, and a huge array of large and dangerous machines, now the apex predators of Earth, live alongside them. This was, quite frankly, a super cool idea, and for the most part, so is the game Horizon Zero Dawn. Released in 2017, it was praised for its design, story, fighting mechanics, and would sell over 20 million copies, as well as win a variety of awards. It also became apparent later that Guerrilla Games had written this game to function largely as a standalone story, worried as they were that it might not be successful, but filled it with little kernels for a sequel, perhaps even a trilogy. With its overwhelming success, however, the sequel and its third installment were greenlit for development, and the franchise would see itself steered towards apparent trilogy status. Trilogies always face a unique set of difficulties. Part 1 must set the stage and keep the audience engaged for Part 2. Part 2 must bridge the content of Part 1 and what is to come for Part 3. And Part 3 must take all of those loose ends and stick the landing. Yet it is the particular task of the sequel which I usually find the most interesting and the most unique, and sure, we all know that endings are hard, but really so are sequels. And that is the case with Horizon Zero Dawn's successor, Horizon Forbidden West, a game which in many ways proves just how difficult a sequel is. While the game finds many places to shine, it also seems to more often collapse under its own weight, like its role as a bridge was approved not by the Department of Regional Planning, but by a few kids in a trench coat in an alley during the dead of night. Okay, this metaphor is getting away from me, so let's just hop in and take a look at Horizon Forbidden West, a pretty messy sequel. To get a better understanding of Horizon Forbidden West, I think we should take a look at some key details of Horizon Zero Dawn. Also, major spoilers ahead for both games. The narrative of the story was written largely by John Gonzalez, a writer known for his excellent work on Fallout New Vegas, another futuristic dystopia video game. I recommend Hbomberguy's also feature-length film about it here. Gonzalez's world building and the pacing of the plot, in tandem with the player's own free roaming and side questing, is generally quite engaging in Zero Dawn. Much of the draw of the story is uncovering a mystery, as well as becoming quite involved with the politics of the game's modern world. The central character is a young woman named Aloy, who is voiced with a compelling no-nonsense intensity by Ashley Birch. Aloy's birth is tied intrinsically with her world's past, as well as the politics of her present day, and uncovering those key secrets is exciting and fun. The game uses Aloy as our point-of-view character, seeing as we know very little about her world, and in many ways, she does not know either. She plays the role of an outsider, having been born as an outcast, which is a form of ostracism and punishment used in the tribal lands she is raised in, the land of the Nora tribe. Aloy grows up in the wild with only her stoic father figure Rost to teach her how to survive independently and how to hunt machines. That's right, machines. Together, we explore the world and learn not just about the Nora tribe and their particular culture, but about many other tribes as well, and Aloy leaves her home behind and begins to explore the expansiveness of her world. The machines too become bigger and more dangerous as she explores new territory, as does the gameplay. If the player is not especially invested in the mystery of Aloy and the mystery of what happened to her distant ancestors, i.e. us, they can certainly be invested in the challenging combat this game presents. Each machine, and there are many, has its own unique method of attack, abilities, and best approach to being brought down. While all machines can be scanned for weak spots, others may take extra damage from stuff like fire or electricity, and all of them will most often have to be hit by projectiles, usually arrows, which the player fires from a variety of bow types. That's right, hit this giant metal bird with arrows, or this titanic T-Rex, before it absolutely annihilates you with not just its size or speed, but an insane arsenal of blow-up-y devices. Hunting machines is an absolute thrill in this game, and unquestionably terrifying while trying to aim and hit at that precise moment. Bringing even the smallest machine down holds a kind of satisfaction, while bringing down the toughest ones is worthy, I think, of a Medal of Honor. To me, and this is just my personal opinion, I get particular enjoyment from this playstyle because I like to use bows or slow-aiming weapons in games which utilize those mechanics. So having a largely bow and arrow based combat system was definitely the cherry on top for my personal gameplay satisfaction. Aloy learns that nearly 1,000 years ago, her ancestors were wiped out basically by the corporate greed of an insane egomaniac cajillionaire called Jeffrey Bezos, and that Aloy and her people are the product of a last-ditch effort aptly named Zero Dawn to revive humanity far in the future, led by a woman named Elizabeth Sobek. Aloy, as it turns out, is a clone of Sobek, grown and hatched by a machine so that she might be able to save her world from the last remnants of Ted Faro's capitalism failures, and of the loose ends from Sobek's Zero Dawn mission. A cult has sprung up around a rogue AI called Hades, formerly of the Zero Dawn Project, and Aloy must work with a wide array of friends she makes on her journey to bring closure to the loose ends of the past, thereby safeguarding her and humanity's future. It is overall a pretty wild story, though one with a lot of fun sci-fi and frankly not unrealistic comparisons to our real actual present, especially around climate change and the insane amounts of power billionaire shitbags like Bezos or Elon Musk hold. Aloy learns everything through exploration, audio logs, and a lot of holograms. The holograms are sometimes criticized, as more often than not, the game's lore will present itself to you as exposition told directly to your face, rather than something more intuitive. That is not across the board, however, and the game shines particularly in moments which are suggestive of history and of loss, like recognizable but decrepit ruins, or of moments conveyed through holograms that are reflective of the desperation Aloy's ancestors were experiencing. This unknown man, for example, trying to wish his son a happy birthday is kind of incredible, and it communicates very well to the player a terrible situation without ever expressly stating what that situation is.
Happy birthday, Isaac! Daddy sure does love his little big man. Look, Daddy can't be there with you and Mom, but we can still have a party, right? Sure we can.
Other criticisms, such as the flat, uninteresting animation of characters speaking to one another, or the repetitive side quests, were definitely also issues on top of the occasional bug or two, as well as the really kind of lackadaisical usage of the loaded word savage.
Thank you again, Savage. May the sun light your way!
Great. People finally stopped calling me outcast, and now it's Savage.
The graphics, however, were certainly praised, but I think set a precedent for an issue which we will return to later. Overall, Horizon Zero Dawn is an excellent game, which I have replayed many times and will certainly do so again. It was also clear too for players that there was more of the story waiting ahead, and the game left obvious clues that a sequel was ready for development. That's where Horizon Forbidden West comes in, and for me, I was really looking forward to playing it. While the mechanics and general gameplay of Forbidden West are taking kind of a backseat here, as I'd like to focus primarily on the core story, I'd like to talk about them in a bit more detail later, after covering some of the shortcomings of the story. The lead writer of this game, Ben McCaw, who too was a lead in the first game, certainly worked with John Gonzalez to continue the series, but Forbidden West is credited as largely McCaw's work, as Gonzalez has moved on to new territory. In Horizon Zero Dawn, Aloy's father figure Rost suffers a tragic death, and Aloy mourns for him in each game. If the player sought to uncover his story, one which he refused to tell Aloy, they will discover that he went on a bloodthirsty quest to avenge his family, leaving his tribal lands and entering what another tribe, the Carja, refer to as the Forbidden West. As it turns out, the Forbidden West is what used to be territory from Utah to the Pacific coast. A lot of this game takes place in California and Nevada, places which I'm certain some in the States do unironically refer to as forbidden. Aloy begins the story faced with two daunting paths, uncovering how the story's overarching plot will manifest into a sequel and character development. The first game saw Aloy come into her own as an independent outsider turning into a necessary leader, though this was largely based on her personality as someone logical, empathetic, and focused. Some criticized her character as coming across a bit flat, and thereby impacting things like dialogue, making it more about progressing the story rather than progressing the character. So Guerrilla Games decided to approach that head on, adding a level of emotional appeal to Aloy's story, finding a problem for her to overcome and become better for it. Was it effective? Aloy's general problems are that because she is so independent, both in personality and due to her past, she has a tendency to abstain from making long-term emotional attachments and prefers to work alone. She's also incredibly tech-savvy and understands many of the logical secret unknowns of her world, while much of the rest in her world are ignorant of its history and practice various religions derived more often from misunderstandings. For example, Aloy's Nora tribe believe in the goddess, which turns out to be a mechanical door. The Carja believe the sun to be God and relate its apparent anger to the manifestation of more dangerous machines, which again is totally unrelated, and also the sun is just the sun. Aloy finds these beliefs to impede her more than anything, and does not have time nor investment in what is more spiritual or to her illogical. So the direction then is that Aloy is lonely. She is burdened by the legacy of Elizabeth Sobek, lacks community or fellowship, and is isolated by her knowledge of the workings of the world. Only she can do this. As the audience, we discover that she has been working on her own the past 6 months to retrieve a copy of the hyper-intelligent AI which Sobek and her team designed for the Zero Dawn project. A program called Gaia, who has the capacity to terraform the Earth into being habitable, which according to the state of things seems to be deteriorating without her. We learn that Gaia destroyed herself some years ago in an effort to circumvent the mysterious signal which hit Earth and caused her sub-programs to go totally whack, including the Hades sub-function, which was the primary antagonist in the last game. This mysterious signal is going to become a major part of the plot, a plot which will by the end of it be nearly incomprehensible. A former friend of Aloy's, another member of the Nora tribe called Varl, tracks Aloy down because he is determined to be her friend and help her with her next journey. Aloy isn't ready for this though because she hasn't truly learned the power of friendship yet. With Varl, the player can begin to see some new mechanics the game has to offer and that the danger of its robotic enemies has greatly increased. The two learn that the next place they need to look for Gaia is in the Forbidden West, and that Aloy's former bitter alliance with a man named Silence must be called into question, as perhaps he is actually a villain. He's not, by the way, or is he? I mean, from a moral standpoint, you can say his actions are villainous. They're certainly cruel and deceitful. I don't know, but if he is a villain, he is, I want to say, the 67th villain in this game's story. Aloy abandons Varl to go it alone, but he finds her again anyway, and Aloy meets another friend from the former game, the Oseram tribesman Erend, who is weirdly reduced to a tiny baby man, really upset about Aloy leaving him behind. We learn that the Forbidden West is home to several additional tribes, one of which is the Tenakth, a tribe split into 3 clans of powerful warriors who have a deep hatred of the Carja tribe, although everyone hates the Carja, so it isn't that surprising. Aloy is permitted to meet with the Carja and the Tenakth peace gathering in order to gain passage into the Forbidden West. It turns out that gaining passage is just her getting a cool knife, which no one asks to see ever again throughout the game, and Aloy can go wherever she pleases without issue. It also turns out that this peace gathering was a trap. Angela Bassett is introduced as an extremely cool looking villain called Regala, the game's 502nd villain, who shows up riding machines ready for war, killing almost everyone at the gathering apart from Aloy, Varl, and Horizon Forbidden West's unquestioningly greatest, most amazing character ever of all time, Kotallo. Oh, Kotallo, we will get to you. After the attack, Varl decides to regroup with Erend, and it is one of many awkward decisions in the game's narrative meant to, for the sake of mechanics, allow the player to be back on their own and chart their course independently, while also muddying along through the Aloy needs friends and friendship character development, which the narrative communicates at best in an extremely surface level way. Aloy will discover that Silence is leading her and us through a maze of information that he always has the answers to all of the time, and particularly as we learn at the end of the game that he has been holding on to some juicy information about an incoming apocalypse when there already was an incoming apocalypse, and instead of just telling Aloy, creates a civil war instead and repeatedly reassures Aloy and us of his intelligence and that the path to discovering this juicy info was not in any way convoluted or hard to follow, or just a bit insane given its level of world-shattering importance. Aloy learns about the copy of Gaia which she needs, the life-balancing hyper-intelligent AI who can ensure a healthy biosphere for the Earth. Aloy finds Gaia in an old base and is attacked by several people that look like they just stepped off the stage during Eurovision, and we learn that actually these are the real villains of this game, numbers 1094. The game goes out of its way, in fact, with conversation after conversation explicitly telling you how evil and bad these guys really are.
Whatever preparations you need to make, upgrades, resupplies, get on it. It won't be long before we take the fight to the Zenith.
Just tell me one thing. Am I gonna get to smash up a bunch of Zenith bastards?
We all are.
Good.
That's just the beginning. The Zeniths want to rob us of our future, too.
We won't let that happen. Know who the enemy is. Do you have any questions?
I'll admit, I find them hard to grasp. From the heavens. And invulnerable.
For now.
And heartbreaking. That such life should be bent on destroying ours.
But I have Omega clearance. We can grab Hephaestus and finally have the advantage over the Zeniths.
Can't wait to see their faces as they stare down a bunch of charging Thunderjaws.
Better them than us.
One of them is even played by Carrie-Anne Moss, yet another brilliant actress known for playing cool, often manipulative or morally ambiguous characters, and she is essentially sidelined until very nearly the end of the game. After a harrowing experience, Varl rescues Aloy, and it is thanks to him and another character we meet from the peaceful Utaru tribe, a woman called Zoe, that Aloy is provided a base of operations. At this base, Aloy is able to talk with Gaia for the first time, who assures Aloy that she can manage to restore and maintain Earth's biosphere, but she needs some more processing power first. She says that one of the worst threats against her is her rogue subfunction Hephaestus, who is designing more dangerous machines and deranging others into aggression. Because that's right, you guessed it, Hephaestus is a villain. Number 3622. It is certainly villainous, at least, in its efforts to eradicate humanity. It must be captured and reintegrated into Gaia's system, and in order to do so, Aloy must find her other missing subfunctions. Doing a series of what can be boiled down to fetch quests, Aloy encounters a wide variety of characters and tasks on her missions to find these subfunctions. She encounters Hikaru, chieftain of all three Tenakth clans, and learns of his personal civil war against Regalla, which Aloy gets quite involved in. Aloy also meets Alva, a member of a clan called the Quen, who have sailed to the coastal shores of dead San Francisco from another continent. Also, there is inexplicably Aloy's own clone, or more specifically, Elizabeth Sobek's clone, and we will return to her later. Aloy learns the power of friendship or whatever on her journey and works with Team Aloy and Gaia to capture Hephaestus, which goes badly, and Varl is sacrificed for the plot to be compelling, I guess. And then Aloy has to work to put down Regalla's civil war, which the player likely forgot was happening and seems more like an annoyance to clean up rather than the compelling terror and drama which a civil war should genuinely hold in a story. Oh, and also she can fly on this sick bird. And also Carrie Ann Moss's character Tilda shows Aloy some art and sits at a table and exposits at her. And there is gay subtext, which for those that cannot read it, it is later just made explicitly text. And that actually she is a villain because, and they fight, and no, there's actually another more eviler villain than her coming, and Okay, let's take a step back. This story is so sodden with villains, it's like wet laundry. It's kind of outrageous. Antagonists in a good story need to have a focus. They need to be motivated, and you need to understand how and why they work in opposition to our heroes. They are as important to a story about good and evil as the hero is. Let's look at a few examples of how stories that have multiple villains can certainly work and are often encouraged in the scope of something as large scale as a trilogy. First, if we're going with an interactive medium like a video game, let's look at a video game trilogy like the space opera Mass Effect. Now, Mass Effect is by no means a perfect series, particularly in how infamously it did not stick its landing. But the second game, the sequel, is a great example of when multiple villains can work. In the first Mass Effect game, our hero, Commander Shepard, determines that the greatest threat to all life in the galaxy is an overwhelming force of murderous metal cuttlefish that systematically exterminate all apex life forms every 50,000 years. They are called the Reapers, and they are on their way. The sequel must bridge the revelation of that impending doom and draw it out into the third game, where that inevitable final battle between good and evil must take place. The sequel does this by placing the Reapers on the back burner, just out of sight, though still in the mind of our hero. Technically, the Reapers exist, but they play a role more ominously on the edge of events. Instead, our hero must put a stop to a smaller band of aliens who are a more direct, immediate threat, but who are expressly working for the Reapers. Our hero, too, works for the Elusive Man, a wealthy weirdo who slowly reveals himself to be influenced by the Reapers, whether he realizes it or not. While he is expressly less villainous for most of the game, he might still be considered a villain by the end of it. That's technically 3 parties of bad guys all in one game, but it is always clear that the Reapers are pulling the strings. We never lose sight of them as the real threat, and because all the other villains literally work for them, the connection is never out of sight. The sequel sets up the Elusive Man to be a puppet of the Reapers for the third installment of Mass Effect. Sure, he's a definite villain in that game too, but the top dog is and always was the Reapers. That's never in question. It's the recipe and the clarity that works for the story, ensuring the Reapers to be a compelling evil, and made all the more villainous by just how many strings you know they are pulling. If we look at a non-interactive media like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, we can also find a similar example of when multiple villains work. At the end of the first installment, The Fellowship of the Ring, the party has split to fulfill different quests, though it is clear that the primary villain is Sauron, and that his ring, which is both his malicious spirit as well as its own unique evil, must be destroyed. In the second film, the split parties must face a variety of villains which are meant to diametrically oppose them as well as the particular tests or struggles they are facing. For Frodo and Sam, the most direct villains they face are the Ring and Gollum, each of which are a corrupting, malicious influence which is tearing apart their pure, loving relationship. For Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, and sort of Gandalf, they must face the villainous wizard Saruman's wrath in the form of his army, bred to destroy them, their peoples, and their way of life. For Merry and Pippin, they must face a severe lack of pipeweed, and also like the reality of ecological disaster via overdevelopment, but like mostly the pipeweed thing. Each of these villainous forces tests our heroes and symbolizes their struggles or what they must overcome in order to become stronger people. They are intimately connected with the development the heroes will undergo, and at the same time, they are all obviously traced back to Sauron himself. All of these evils are the result of Sauron's influence, and his corruption is the obvious factor in the suffering of all of our heroes and their companions. In Lord of the Rings, it is always obvious who the primary villain is, and why he must be stopped, but the domino effect of his influence in creating more villains serves an explicit purpose to add greater and more compelling dimension to our heroes. In Horizon Forbidden West, the overwhelming number of bad guys detracts severely from the story and serves very little clarity of purpose. These villains don't answer to one force pulling the strings, and besides have very little connection with one another. Apart from some of the bad guys just like being aware of the others, the strongest connection we find is that Regalla is being manipulated by Sylens entirely off screen. To that end, Regalla's conclusion is wildly anticlimactic and serves no change to the story whether the player decides if she lives or dies. Executing her in cold blood too being one of very few actual decisions the player is allowed to make in this story, and one which is rather un-Aloy-like anyway. None of these villains serves to symbolically challenge Aloy or to represent some aspect of her growth as a character. Aloy must be good at fighting Regalla to survive her onslaught, but guess what? She was already good at fighting. We know that well. Regalla isn't even expressly attacking Aloy, she's attacking her former leader, Hekarro. Sylens is a dick and Aloy doesn't like him, and at the end of the game, that's still true. The Eurovision crew tries to attack her and also kidnap her and utilize Earth's resources unfairly, and well, unsurprisingly, Aloy fights back and is like, no, I don't want to be kidnapped and stop destroying my home. A fairly straightforward response. The homicidal AI also tries to attack her with its machines, and she does, again, what she can to fight back. Aloy is stagnant in the face of these challenges. In the end, she usually just proves again and again that she is good at fighting and thinking about how to fight. But yeah, we already knew that. Perhaps had there simply been fewer bad guys in the first place, or that their hierarchy of evil was established and in plain sight, the story would be sharper and more focused. By the time our final boss fight happens, it is inexplicably with Tilda, Carrie-Anne Moss's character, who we only recently confirmed our suspicions of about being a villain. The emotional weight of a hero working towards the final boss, who they knew from very nearly the start of their journey to be the final boss, is entirely lost. The final showdown is reduced to figuring out the simplistic mechanics of the fight, winning easily because of its severe lack of challenge in a game with famously challenging combat, and going, To make matters unbearably worse, we learned that this Eurovision crew was actually just a bunch of mean rich weirdos running away from the real threat, and I cannot stress this enough, the game's assumption of the real, actual evil villain, an AI of subliminal rage, ego blaster. You know what? I don't care. It's an evil little orb on its way to do some damage. It's the Reapers of this game, but way more stupid and the most impotent, lackluster twist I've encountered in a long time. Perhaps the writers thought they were being clever because they set up this twist even in the first game when they mentioned the mysterious signal, which made Gaia's subfunctions wacko and which permeates the story in the sequel. It turns out that this incoming murder orb was the origin of the signal, and yet reads more that the writers may not have had an actual answer yet when the mysterious signal was first conceived, and after a while found their answer, inserting it much later into the game so that it could be this exciting little twist. I maintain that had the writers decided to stick with just one bad guy, and perhaps given them a few mini bad guys, this game would have been substantially better in storytelling, and had they decided to keep this evil incoming orb of doom, I might have been more charitable to what a stupid reveal it very much is. With their level of charisma, Carrie-Anne Moss could have been the one and only villain, or Angela Bassett the one and only villain, or even that old sneaky Sylens, perhaps even one of them might have been a sub-villain, influenced or clearly working for the head honcho, or perhaps they might have been scapegoats or red herrings for a character in a position of immense authority like the Tenakth chieftain Hekarro. Or for God's sake, what about that homicidal sentient AI literally capable of making killer robot dinosaurs the size of skyscrapers? Anything which could have focused the narrative, shown a clear hierarchy, connection, motivation, and prepared the player for a truly weighted, earned final showdown. The first game in particular is overtly political on many occasions, and developing a villain to really challenge Aloy as a character on that same political level and challenge us as the player to think critically, weigh our options, adding some level of dimension apart from, well, these guys speak like borderline fascists, so they must be the actual evil, would have been a much meatier game. So, let's take a look at Aloy's companions on a deeper level. Where exactly does Aloy learn the power of friendship? I am not sure. Poor Varl. Varl is a nice guy, and one could almost forget that he comes from the Nora tribe, like the plot did. The Nora are culturally a very religious people, warriors with strict rules. Even Aloy, born an outcast, needed to be granted special permission to leave her tribal homelands, and she was given a special position. To leave the sacred land is otherwise largely forbidden. Varl, only surviving child of the literal war chieftain, seems to get over that hump real quick, and that's a very good thing because he has been reduced to a friendly, banter-filled plot tool whose primary design is to move the story forward and assist Aloy largely off-screen, rather than to exist as his own character, to find some more substantial level of development, or even to challenge Aloy past saying, Aloy, you sure do need some friends. One of the most obvious methods in which some deeper character development might have been achieved was to bring Varl's faith into question. As a member of the Nora tribe, he was a devout believer in the goddess, and this could perhaps have become a point of conflict, as all of Aloy's actions work to disprove or to discredit his faith, especially as she provides him the tools to learn about their ancient ancestors. Varl could have experienced a crisis of faith, that his center in the wide, frighteningly enormous universe was rocked to its core. I mean, anything. Maybe even a moment for he and Aloy to together reflect on how the loss of their family members during the exact same massacre that each of them lost family to at the exact same time is impacting them, how they each grieve together. Honestly, anything to give him some dimension. Varl is nice and he is loyal, but when reduced to a mere plot device as he so is, it weakens the story as a whole. This is why when he is sacrificed like a lamb to the slaughter for the plot's sake, giving Aloy and maybe the player added emotional weight to avenge him and bring down Eurovision, that depth just isn't there. For one thing, Aloy was already gung-ho about bringing down Eurovision. That's literally all she has been doing. She didn't need another plot reason to go fight them. For us, Varl has remained so flat and two-dimensional that his death reads more as a pathetic attempt at engaging the player's emotional investment in the story. Rather than just being sad, it's wickedly transparent and almost embarrassing. Aloy too could be read as reticent to form close attachments because she was so brutally hurt by the tragic loss of her father figure, and is terrified to go through that pain again. At this point, by the time the story has decided that she's learned the power of friendship, she is then immediately punished for it, losing Varl for next to no reason. There's nothing deeper communicated to us, however, apart from that she is real sad about it and extra determined to finish what she started, avenging him in the process. The final blow against Varl's character is that to add further emotional complexity to his death, his girlfriend Zoe is burdened with one of the most tired tropes ever, being pregnant with his baby, but it being something which he didn't know before his death. Yet we the players are assured that his baby will, of course, grow up knowing what a hero he was. Poor Zoe, poor Varl, poor us. I love Kotallo. Let it be known across the world, let my voice ring out in the streets, I love him. Through Aloy's quest, we meet Kotallo, who is another fierce Tenakth soldier and one of Hekaro's best, though he has been maimed and lost the use of his arm since his last encounter with Regalla. Kotallo is excellently played by Noshir Dalal, who many might remember from his role as Charles in Red Dead Redemption 2. Kotallo is excellent because his particular story is given a unique level of attention and development. When we first meet him, he is bitter and angry for having lost his arm, and how it marks him in his culture, a culture where when displaying an apparent weakness, it is considered more merciful to throw the weak to the wilderness and let the machines take them. Aloy helps to show Kotallo that there is always another way, particularly by using cleverness over violence, and so impresses him that he elects to join her mission. Kotallo is able to learn from new cultures, learn about the world that came before him, and to play a vital role in helping to save his own. Though the player may help him to craft a new mechanical arm, his story also manages to subvert the stupid trope of the disabled needing to be fixed. When Kotallo realizes the arm doesn't complete him, he already was complete just as he is.
Then why are you taking it off?
This is what I am now. What I overcame. Anything else feels wrong. Like a disguise. I'll use the new arm when I need it, but the rest of the time, I will simply be myself.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
player may also choose to speak with him at the base or even when fighting with him on the field, and Kotalo was written even past his character arc, to have other realistic features, to have, in short, a personality. He has a weird sense of humor, and he's a bit of a freak on the battlefield. It all just adds, and it makes him one of the strongest characters in the game. Based on mutual respect, Kotalo and Aloy also have a strong foundation in their relationship. It's exceptionally clear on both sides how they can recognize the abilities of one another, and that Aloy really values him as a teammate. There's no doubt for the player either that having Kotalo on Team Aloy is anything but an excellent choice. And he adds a great dynamic to the companions as a whole. We also get this exchange, one of the best in the game, if you ask me.
No, I'm not getting dragged further into this madness.
Hekarro ordered you to help me. You gonna defy him like that arrogant shit up there?
That was an unkind comparison.
Zoe, a member of the peaceful Utaru tribe, is also an interesting new addition to the cast, but comes with one of the failings of the narrative, that much of her most potent character arc is optional, that it is a side quest. Her backstory too is sad and fascinating, but communicated largely through optional dialogue, and mostly just at your face in a here I am telling you while we stand here awkwardly kind of way. Then, as I mentioned before, there's the whole baby thing. Ugh. Erend, who continues to be weirdly infantilized throughout the game, despite the fact that he is the literal captain of an elite force of soldiers defending a king, and also had a plot-adjacent character arc about needing to mature in the first game, has a side quest hidden extremely deeply in a long other side quest. Many players won't even know it is there, and it adds very little to Erend's character apart from rehashing his story from the first game, and then failing to add any dimension to it. This really sucks because I like Erend. He's super charismatic and he's a complicated character, but the plot seems to have decided his apparent buffoonery needs to take center stage for some reason, and it detracts from him intensely. It is perhaps Alva of the Quen tribe who receives the most balanced level of core to optional story character development. Her desire to work for the survival of her family is clearly communicated by her desperation. She is very much not a fighter, but willing to do whatever it takes for information that might give her family a chance. Aloy and she work towards common goals within the story's core plot, and Aloy can learn more about this unique background of the Quen tribe. By the time Aloy has reached a point in the game in which the player may do Alva's optional side quest, there is very little gleaned from this quest that we don't already know about Alva or her tribe. If anything, this quest feels more like a favor to her, as she and Aloy have already built a solid repertoire with one another. She's also super duper cute and sweet, and she is queer, which you will only learn if you talk to her like 1 million times. The story of her girlfriend is annoying in how out of the way and hidden it is as a part of her character motivations.
Who's this Federa you mentioned?
She is another diviner. One of our best. We used to be rivals at the academy. I hated her guts. But apparently there's a fine line between hate and love. We became very close, and then I was assigned to the expedition. She promised she'd wait for me, no matter how long it took.
Well, that was smart of her. She won't do any better.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I do.
Beta, as I mentioned, is Aloy's clone. That is Elizabeth Sobek's clone. She has a little in common with Aloy. They were both raised in isolation, they're both lonely, great with tech, burdened by Elizabeth Sobek's legacy. Beta also thought she was the only other clone, hence the name Beta, Elizabeth. Yet Beta's existence seems to bring up more issues with the story. Both Aloy and Beta are seeking some kind of purpose, and a lot of it has to do with love. Aloy has a kind of love for Elizabeth and the desire to see her work achieved fully, but she places Elizabeth on a pedestal, hero-worshipping her in a way which can be more detrimental to her sense of self than anything. And the game's story somehow fails to find resolution to this. It begins to when Aloy witnesses a recording of Elizabeth showing her as only human, reclusive, withdrawn, unsociable, despite her efforts to save all humankind.
Travis was wrong. Elizabeth was trying to make sure life had a future. She cared about everyone.
I'm not so sure. The exceptional walk a path of solitude, Aloy, as you and I are well aware of.
But Aloy never really seems to resolve that Elizabeth was just human, and while she and Beta could have followed that story thread together and become more self-assured people for it, the plot seems to quietly drop it. Beta acts instead, ironically, as another tool for progression of the main plot, and as a well of expository information about those who raised her, the Eurovision villains. Without Beta's knowledge, that is, again, expressly telling us to our face, how else were we as the player meant to learn about the real bad guys of this game? Actually, one better example was near the beginning of the game, when we could explore and learn more naturally about them as we explored the ruins of one of their old gathering places. This place looks like a church, but clearly was inhabited by the wealthy. They speak in strange future-y jargon, and they come across as cult-like, Scientology-ish, and deeply exclusionary. I learned all of this by virtue of exposition written into natural exploration, and it held much greater impact than anything Beta had to tell me as boringly as possible. Beta has a series of these dialogue exchanges with Aloy in a small, static room for the player to learn. And as Beta expresses herself quite badly and to Aloy's eyes unsympathetically, though in a way which makes sense due to her upbringing, Aloy for a while just kind of says, "That Beta sure does bother me." The issues that Beta might bring up, Aloy's perception of herself, Aloy's relationship to Elizabeth, Aloy's struggle with identity, any of it is explored either not at all or in a very shallow way. When Beta is captured by Eurovision, Aloy resolves herself to save Beta, referring to her later as sister.
Kathy would have my back like a real sister.
The term, even after a few slightly more intimate conversations and many other arguments otherwise, definitely feels sudden, out of place, or even unearned. I want to say that perhaps the closeness they apparently achieve might symbolize Aloy loving herself more, but even that feels charitable. For the story to say, Aloy must learn the power of friendship, and I guess self-love, by providing just herself, like just identically her own copy, is not a great get-out-of-jail-free card to character development. Tilda is briefly your companion when you are unsure of whether or not she's actually a villain, even though she obviously just is a villain, owing largely to the excellent villainous aura which Carrie-Anne Moss is so capable of. Unfortunately, she is deeply underutilized, as I mentioned, so that the final battle with her is incredibly anticlimactic. She also serves as bleakly expository, providing more insight about Elizabeth's reclusive nature much too far in the game for it to even really matter. She then, and I mentioned this earlier, turns out to be the evil gay villain trope, and very badly at that. If it wasn't clear earlier conversing with her that she was speaking in queer subtext, it becomes very overt when she tells Aloy she plans to kidnap her and recreate the failed relationship she had with Elizabeth over time with Aloy. It's really weird. The predatory queer trope, the kidnapping, the implications, it's not great. Yeah.
I loved Elizabeth more than you could ever know. And I let her stay behind to die with the rest of humanity. A mistake I have regretted for 1,000 years. Now she stands before me again. Not some inferior copy, but her best possible self. So I'm not asking. You're coming with me. It may seem harsh now, but you'll forgive me in a few centuries.
Regalla can be your companion if you decide not to kill her, which again seems more like the Aloy thing to do. This choice doesn't at all impact the story, except Kotalo gets angry at Aloy for like 3 seconds before he's like, wait, no, it's all good, I'm okay. Regalla, when kept alive, is wildly neutered by the story, and in a surprising way. This is a woman so intense you feel like she could have lit herself on fire for the cause. But then they just write in how, in her culture, the context just makes sense, and she'll just like help you out now. And then she dies anyway, and with her death you just wonder, wow, can you imagine if her boss battle didn't feel like a side quest, if she had been Aloy's direct opposition, if she had been the final boss battle after hours of earning that coveted title? Silence briefly is a companion, and at the very least is willing to help out Team Aloy during the final attack on Eurovision. As I already mentioned, Silent's role in this game is kind of insane, and I think could have been utilized in a totally different way, especially because of Lance Reddick's engaging performance as him. Cool, calculating, and utterly unknowable. I think also that it would have been totally fine to learn more about his backstory in terms of how it could have related to the plot. Instead, we pretty much were given, Aloy, I am smart, look at how smart I am, and then the most incomprehensible information ever, comparable to any of the characters stating their master plan in Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, a film famous for being confusing and convoluted. So, apart from that, your friends, who consist largely of optional interactions, whether by dialogue or side quest, will otherwise remain static, and I mean it, they don't move from their areas at your base until they appear in main quests, but you as the player must make a lot of their development happen, and otherwise a lot of it will simply happen off screen. By the time the story decides that Aloy really has learned the power of friendship, to say it feels unearned is a vast understatement, and any emotional resonance it might have struck with the players is likely to now be uninspired. Whether for experience or for interest you have done your companion side quests before reaching the end of the game, it reads more, if anything, that Aloy has simply realized the power of having a lot of people around on a group project can sometimes make things go by faster. That in some ways, winning a war is just more convenient when you have more people on your side so that they can split into groups and cover more ground. Okay, I've been ragging on this game like a lot, I know. Some of its most heinous crimes are poor characterization and a deeply unfocused plot, and many times communicating exposition in an exposition-heavy story through some of the most boring ways humanly possible. In many instances, gone is the intuitive, emotional delivery of exposition the way that Happy Birthday Isaac is able to. But, and thank God for this, that's not true 100% of the time in this game. In some places, this game is at its most excellent level of storytelling, and I'd like to talk about those moments because I did genuinely enjoy them. For me, they were the most standout moments. In Aloy's pursuit of Gaia's missing subfunctions and later some special code thing, she must do a series of quests to find them, but some of those contain stories which represent the wider story as a whole are amazing. When she must find the subfunction Apollo, it is very uniquely in a vast, dry desert, the ruins of Las Vegas. You as the player might go, weird place for an aquatic-themed myth, and it is, already a unique spin on things. When Aloy arrives, and throughout the course of her efforts in restoring this hiding place, the player is able to explore a wide cavernous ruin, first appropriately underwater and then when it is drained. The level design is beautiful and haunting, and the soundtrack and sound design perfectly utilized, as Aloy restores this place, certainly not to its former glory, but instead to something a mere fraction of what it once was. The sense of loneliness is palpable. This underground city of lights, excitement, and what once was a place thriving with life is empty. The people who live there are long gone, and their absence is felt as the city continues to run in emptiness. That is how to deeply and emotionally communicate loss and a world long vanished to time. It reminded me very much of one of my favorite sci-fi short stories, There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. In that story, a mechanized house continues to function, though it is rotting to time and though the family that used to live in the house has long since vanished. Without ever expressly stating what happened, the reader can understand through subtle context clues that something catastrophic took place and that the loss was huge. Our creations live on past us and will continue though we are no longer around to see them. Who will feel our loss if none of us are left to experience it? In Aloy's pursuit to find some kind of special code thing, she and Alva discover its location to be in a building called Thebes, as in the ancient Egyptian city. This quest is appropriately called Pharaoh's Tomb, as in Ted Pharaoh, the lunatic cajillionaire that brought about Earth and humanity's end. The naming, Pharaoh, as well as the Pharaoh decorations, are a bit on the nose, but the story found inside is intriguing and incredibly, almost gleefully fucked up to unfold through visuals and sound. I personally find stories of people living in culty, confined places together, especially wealthy lunatics, and then going crazy over time to be pretty fun stories, but that's just a me thing. Seeing as he was basically the world's richest man, Ted Pharaoh commissioned a massive underground bunker to be made for himself and his select chosen, so that they might live out their final years there as the rest of humanity died to Ted's catastrophic designs up on the surface. Aloy discovers that Ted was living lavishly and in debauchery with a harem and next to anything he might have wanted. Slowly, of course, people began to die or killed themselves or killed each other, until it was only Ted and one of his doctors. Completely delusional and in the most powerful throes of megalomania, Ted asks his doctor to implant him with some crazy sci-fi medicine so that his cells regenerate and, in effect, make it so that he cannot die. His desire is to live until humanity has reappeared per the Zero Dawn Project, and Ted can emerge as their leader and their god. Eventually, it is just Ted alone, and the sci-fi medicine he received is mutating his genetic makeup. And in true horrific sci-fi excellence, we discover that Ted never did die. He's been alive for over 1,000 years, completely encased in this tomb. Except we never actually see him. We just hear the most hideous, gurgling screech when another character sees him. Whatever Ted was, he certainly isn't anymore. His mutations have turned him into something truly monstrous, yet, as he wanted, left him unable to die. I love that we never actually see him. We can piece together the state of him in our mind, and our imagination can fill in the details of the monstrous form he must appear as. We wonder what, if anything, about him was lucid, what a torturous, ironic existence which he brought upon himself, and what a morbid, fascinating short story this is, especially one which we've been able to explore through this interactive medium. On a somewhat related note, this quest allows us to, at the same time, learn more about Alva's tribe, the Quen, and it is a demonstration of when this game's world building is very smart. The Quen pride themselves on their assemblage of knowledge from extinct humanity, from the old world, which is very unlike most of the tribes Aloy has encountered before. Quen culture is hierarchical, and we learn that they, somewhat religiously, worship ancestors, that is, famous and influential people from the old world. Their culture is built loosely around a corporate hierarchy, with the CEO being someone of great power, except they pronounce it CEO. It's never something framed as funny either for the player to be like, oh, look at how ignorant they are. The game is quite upfront about their access to ancient knowledge being quite limited and how seriously it has built their culture. It's so limited, in fact, that it is outdated, and some of it is intentionally falsified as it would have been in our time, propaganda. Aloy is aware of a great deal of the timeline that led to the extinction of humanity, while the Quen are more behind. They believe that Ted Faro was the savior of humanity because for a while this is how he was framed in the media. They don't have the information that it was his designs which destroyed humanity. As a result, they worship Ted Faro as a god, the way he had craved, and in a way which greatly disturbs Aloy, as she knows the truth. It's a fascinating dynamic and a fascinating development of a sci-fi culture worshipping at the feet of misinformation. The Tenakth, too, are a culture built largely around misinformation. Their ancient founders encountered an old hologram of pretty run-of-the-mill war propaganda, but through ignorance believed it to be something divine. The hologram refers to various branches of the military, which the early Tenakth took to heart, dividing themselves into according clans and placing the power of a warrior as their very highest ideal. The misunderstanding of this war propaganda permeates throughout their entire culture and elevates their most ideal values of war as divine. Aloy can see some of these holograms for herself, and the player can see it reflected in the Tenakth overtly and in a fascinating way. And sure, there's a lot of talk-to-your-face exposition about their culture, but there are other, more intuitive ways of understanding it as well. Each one of these instances is an example of excellent world building and excellent storytelling. They are what stand out to me the most and the very happiest and most engaged I felt when playing throughout this game. The mechanics bit. I knew we'd get here. Let's cover some goods and bads. For a reason I don't really understand, Forbidden West includes a couple of moments to pick a tone in which to communicate something like anger or thoughtfulness or whatever, or lets you make a decision. These are far and few in between and don't impact the story, so what is the point of them if the player is railroaded into the story? It feels like possibly the story may have once been conceived with a few different paths on which to take and perhaps several endings, which are common aspects to story-driven games at the moment. That's not what this game is now though, and I have no idea whether that would have added to it or not. In the first game, you have many more moments to communicate Aloy's tone according to a variety of situations, which I kind of liked, and which I found to be an interesting, if not somewhat benign, addition to the game. Unfortunately, one of the only instances in Forbidden West I can remember as having a tone communication moment was in talking with the Sun King Avad after he asks you out, something he already did in the first game, and Aloy rejected him then, telling him very much what the truth was. Hey, your girlfriend's dead and you're projecting onto me, so why is this here in Forbidden West? There are otherwise no romance options in this game, and this mechanic overall comes across more like a wet tissue. Okay, this one is really just my opinion more than any other instance in this video, which was just me being obviously objectively right about everything. There's too many ways to fight enemies. There's too many weapon types. There's too many buttons to access them. There's too many ammo types to hit enemies with. There's too many bows, and this game was unbelievably annoying when it yelled at me constantly to use something besides a bow. A bow is all I want to use, and that should be enough. I don't need to use the Meccano Speedum Doogie Boogie launcher to kill this robot turtle, okay? I just want to use a bow. Stop yelling at me. I mean, I'm the one yelling here. Old man yells at cloud, but still. There were too many experience points. The talent tree just becomes unnecessary when you max out every single category because this game is giving you too many points to spend in each talent tree. I don't need every possibility of playstyle all at once demanding my attention simultaneously. There's way too much loot in this game. It is constant. No matter where you go, there is just stuff littered every inch in front of you. Nothing feels special or like you must conserve it because you can find it everywhere and constantly without fail. Working to get a box of loot with one of the game's new tools feels like a waste of time because you were probably already carrying 27 versions of what was in that box. Finding quest objects can therefore feel a bit more rewarding, but also sometimes like a chore. The sheer amount of additional loot to acquire in order to unlock certain things in this game also feels frustrating. You are both given too much all at once and otherwise forced to endure hours of grinding and locating materials. There's bugs.
The bugs!
And a lot of them. Resetting the game had to happen several times for me. On more than one occasion, I fell through the map, which was pretty wild. Also, the climbing mechanics were a bit messy and caused me to utter a fair bit of frustrated profanity. I actually liked a fair few of the new puzzles and thinking bits in this game. I enjoyed using the new tools in the game, although the loot was never worth it in my opinion. I did enjoy the process of getting to them, and I found that overall, the puzzle designs were really engaging. The swimming was a bit wonky, but I really enjoyed exploring caverns underwater with glowing rocks and gems and plants and stuff. Even exploring these huge ruins and lakes or in beautiful Pacific Ocean waters was excellent, eerie and kind of frightening, but so good. I like that you could have random encounters out in the wild, saving people and such, and that you could meet them again in cities or towns or camps. They'd remember you and usually give you rewards, or at least a thank you. It made the world feel more alive and reactive to Aloy and us as the players. There were a lot of side quests that I really enjoyed, especially because they almost always included a fascinating range of side characters. The side quest stories were usually unique, often challenging, and especially engaging with the characters introduced to us. When we could return to them for a part 2 or 3 of these quests, it really added and felt so much more alive or impactful. Aloy feels some of her most assured as a character during these quests too, and I often found her interactions with these random side characters sometimes more compelling than her interactions with the main story. This game looks good. This game looks excellent. It's beautiful. Many people worked on it passionately for weeks, months, years. During COVID, the studio actually treated its workers like people, looking out for their safety. People did not have to do crunch when developing this game, a term used for incredibly abusive overtime practices commonly utilized in the gaming industry. This game was meant to be an outstanding, showy doorway into the PlayStation 5, and for all intents and purposes, it is. Like I said, it looks good, and there were so many people who worked so hard to make that happen. But that can't be all that a video game is. That can't be what an interactive visual medium is only supposed to be. No matter how beautiful it looks, it needs real substance, and for a story-driven game like this, that story has to hold up just as well as the graphics do. In many ways, it really falls short, and it's messy and frustrating, and the overwhelming girth of this story is so often communicated in so uninteresting a way. This is an interactive medium, one with a heavy emphasis on visual storytelling. It should ask us to think, show us without telling, and treat our intelligence and our ability to read symbolism and depth at a much higher level than what it offers. For the most part, it never does. I haven't replayed the game. In my finished file, the game feels empty, and my companions, imprisoned in their new static locations, seem sad and two-dimensional. There's no draw for me to jump back into the story knowing what I know now. Horizon Zero Dawn drew me in with a compelling mystery to solve, while Horizon Forbidden West just asked me to make sense of whatever it was trying to say, and honestly, I don't think it was saying anything at all. Will I play the next installment? Undoubtedly. I want to see it through, and I hope to find a story as strong as how beautiful the game looks, or else, really, what's the point? If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, please like, subscribe, or just share with your friends and family. Any support is appreciated. Thank you.
I may be maimed, but I've still got a strong back.